There are places where safety is not the absence of danger, but the careful timing of it, where rules do not protect you so much as slow something down long enough for you to live a normal life. Most people believe emergency numbers exist to summon help. They believe phones ring because someone is alive on the other end. They believe confirmation creates certainty. But systems are built by humans, and humans trust repetition. We trust forms. We trust procedures. We trust that checking something twice makes it real. Out here, the land does not respond to certainty. It responds to attention. If you have ever believed that following the rules makes you safe, stay with this until the end. My name is Yazzie. I am a sergeant with the Navajo Nation Police Department. I have served 17 years, all of them in the northeastern Arizona district, working the area around Dennehotso, the high desert, the washes, the long roads that don't show up on most maps. If you're not from here, it's hard to explain the scale. You can drive for an hour and pass 3 houses. At night, sound travels wrong. Radios crackle. Phones don't always behave like they should. We don't call it isolation. We call it distance, with memory. The first thing you learn working out here is that wildlife doesn't call for help. The second thing is that people do. The third thing, learned later, and only if you survive long enough, is that sometimes the system answers when it shouldn't. There are rules for that. They aren't written down. They're passed from one officer to another, usually at the end of a shift, when you're tired and more honest than you mean to be. I broke one of those rules in 2013. Someone else broke one before me in 2006. He didn't make it home. His name was Aaron Begay. He was a patrol officer, younger than me, steady, careful. In November of 2006, he responded alone to a 911 hang-up call traced to a ranch line west of Dennehotso, near an arroyo that hadn't held water in years. The line had been disconnected since the late 1990s. Aaron went anyway. He followed procedure. He followed compassion. He believed that if a system reports a call, there must be a person. They found his unit the next morning. Engine cold. Door open. No blood. No footprints beyond his own. The report says missing. We use a different word. Within my first year, a senior officer told me quietly, if a landline calls you from dead ground, you do not confirm it more than twice. At the time, I thought he meant paperwork. I was wrong. By the time this started happening to me, I was already a supervisor. I had trained new officers. I had sat with families after notifications. I had learned how to speak calmly into radios, while my hands shook below the dashboard. The calls began as anomalies, dispatch glitches, phantom rings. The first one came in on a Tuesday, just after 2 a.m. clear weather. No storms, no solar activity worth noting. 911, what is your emergency? Silence. Then a click. Dispatch ran the trace automatically. Old copper line. Decommissioned address. No subscriber. They flagged it as a misroute. That should have been the end. But protocol says, verify. Rule 1, though no one calls it that, is that every emergency call gets confirmation, even the broken ones. So dispatch called the number back. It rang. That was the first confirmation. The second came when the system auto-logged a location. Same address, same dead property. The third confirmation is where things change. That's the one you don't do unless you're ready. We didn't know that yet. By the end of that week, we had 5 calls. Always between 1:30 and 3 a.m. Always silent. Always from lines that no longer existed. I remember standing in the dispatch room listening to the printer spit out logs that contradicted each other. Disconnected numbers with active routing. Aging infrastructure behaving like it had intent. One of the younger dispatchers asked me if it could be someone using old equipment. A hobbyist. A prank. I told her no. Not because I knew better. because I needed her calm. That was my first mistake. There are rules about how many times you verify a thing that refuses to resolve. They exist because confirmation creates attention, and attention is what it uses. We don't call it an entity in reports. We don't call it anything official. Informally, among ourselves, we talk about the third confirmation. It doesn't lie. It doesn't invent data. It waits for you to insist that something be real. The limitation, the only one we know for certain, is this. It cannot persist if you act without full verification. That sounds backwards. It sounds dangerous. It is also the only reason I'm alive. In early February, one of the calls changed. This time, there was breathing. Dispatch froze. Every instinct we have says breathing means a person, means urgency. They ran the trace again. Second confirmation. I told them to stop. I remember the silence in the room when I said it, that sharp professional quiet when people realize a supervisor is making a call that won't look good later. Sergeant, the dispatcher said, if there's someone, I know. I said, I know. Duty pulls hard out here. So does compassion. They are the levers it uses best. I took the call myself. 911, I said. This is Sergeant Yazzie. If you can hear me, say something. The breathing stopped. Then, very softly, I heard my last name. Not spoken. Placed. Like it had been waiting for the right mouth. I ended the call. That violated another rule. One we don't admit exists. Rule 3 is incomplete. It says, do not engage personally. It doesn't tell you what to do when the system already has. That night I went home and didn't sleep. At 3:12 a.m., my home phone rang. We disconnected that line when my kids were born. I stared at it until it stopped. The next morning, I filed an equipment irregularity report. I used neutral language. I always do. Administration sent it back with a note. No actionable findings. That's how institutional minimization begins. Not with denial. With exhaustion. 2 weeks later, one of my officers, Luke Nez, took a call I had flagged. I was in the field, out of range for a few minutes longer than I should have been. By the time I got back on radio, Luke was already en route. The call had a voice this time. It said his mother's name. She passed in 2009. That was the first emotionally devastating event tied directly to me. Because I had taught him to trust confirmation. They found Luke alive, barefoot, walking along the road like he was counting steps. He didn't remember leaving his unit. After that, I started breaking the rules on purpose. I stopped confirming. I stopped closing loops. I told my dispatchers to log the calls once and let them sit unresolved. The calls increased. That's the trade. Containment, not prevention. There was a containment failure in Utah the following year. Different agency. Same pattern. I only know because someone I trained called me quietly and asked if we had phone trouble too. We don't write that down. By the end of this part of my service, I understood something that still costs me sleep. The landlines aren't haunted. They're witnesses. And the system, the one built to help, will always try to understand something that survives on being understood. If you're listening to this and you work in emergency services, there's something you need to hear now, before it uses your professionalism against you. Do not seek the third confirmation. If a call comes from a place that no longer exists, you choose ignorance. Not because it's safe, but because safety is not the goal anymore. I learned early that containment does not look like control. It looks like neglect that has been carefully measured. After Luke's incident, I issued quiet guidance. Not memos. Not emails. Just conversations at the end of shifts, radios turned down, engines idling. If a call comes from a disconnected line, I told them, log it once. Do not call back. Do not reroute. Do not ask dispatch to verify. Someone always asks the same question. What if someone really needs help? That question is the pressure point. It always has been. So I answered honestly. Then someone already broke a rule before you ever heard the phone ring. That didn't sit well. It wasn't supposed to. The calls did not stop. They multiplied. But they changed. Without the second and third confirmations, they lost something. Not volume. Precision. The times drifted. The location spread farther from Dennehotso into areas with worse coverage, older infrastructure, places where the maps were already unreliable. It was adapting. That was when I understood the thing we were dealing with was not bound to the phones themselves. It was bound to the process. Verification is a ritual. Emergency work is full of them. Say the address twice. Confirm the spelling. Repeat the callback number. Ask the same question in a different way. Those habits keep people alive. They also feed whatever this is. The second emotionally devastating event came in spring. A missing child. Her name was Lena, 7 years old. Last seen near her grandmother's house, close to a wash that cuts deep after storms. This was real, unquestionably real. Search and rescue came out. Volunteers, family members. And then, during the second night, the calls started again. Same pattern. Disconnected landlines. Silent. But this time, one of them used a child's voice. Dispatch froze. I was standing right there. I heard it through the console speakers. "Hello?" the voice said. Soft, uncertain. Every person in that room knew the name. We had been saying it for hours. Someone reached for the callback key. I put my hand over theirs. "If you confirm that," I said, "we lose her forever." That was a lie. Or maybe it wasn't. The truth is, I didn't know. I was choosing between two kinds of guilt. We logged the call once. We did not respond to it. They found Lena alive the next morning. Cold. Dehydrated. But alive. The report never mentioned the call. It listed terrain, exposure, time. That was the first time I realized the system could coexist with the threat, as long as we accepted that some truths would remain undocumented. Not everyone agreed. One of the volunteers, a man in his 60s, pulled me aside after the debrief. "I heard her," he said, "on the radio. Why didn't you follow it?" I didn't answer, because the honest answer is not something you tell civilians. The calls grew bolder after that. They began using names more accurately. Not just last names, nicknames, maiden names. The kinds of details that exist only in memory and paperwork. One night, it used my daughter's voice. She was asleep in the next room. I did not answer. That choice cost me something permanent. There is a kind of distance that forms when you refuse to respond to a voice asking for help, even when you know it isn't real. Especially then. My wife noticed it first. The way I checked doors twice. The way I disconnected the phone every night, even though it was already dead. I couldn't explain without breaking the implicit disclosure rule we all live under. Some things are passed hand to hand, not home to home. The third emotionally devastating event happened because someone followed the rules correctly. A new supervisor from another district rotated in temporarily. Good officer. By the book. He noticed the unresolved call logs. He asked questions. I gave him the sanitized version. He insisted on compliance. "The system requires closure," he said. "If there's a pattern, we need confirmation." That word again. He ordered a full audit. 3 confirmations. Back to back. The phones rang all night. By morning, one of our dispatchers was gone. No struggle, no note. Just an empty chair, and a headset left neatly on the console. Her name was Marissa. She had a son in middle school. The report said left voluntarily. I signed it. That signature will stay with me longer than anything the thing has ever said. After that, I stopped pretending this was just a local problem. I made calls I wasn't supposed to make. old academy contacts, people who had transferred out of Navajo Nation jurisdiction. The pattern was everywhere. Rural Alaska, northern Maine, parts of the desert in Nevada. Different systems, same behavior. Dead infrastructure reasserting itself when asked politely enough. Always after the third confirmation. Always exploiting duty. Always collapsing when someone acted without complete certainty. One ranger told me they survived because they ignored a distress beacon they had personally tested an hour earlier. I knew it was wrong, he said. And that's why it worked. That's the contradiction at the center of this. Correct behavior feeds it. Improvisation starves it. But improvisation gets people killed too. By summer, enforcement fatigue set in. Dispatchers stopped asking questions. Officers stopped pushing back. Normalization of horror looks like boredom. It looks like coffee cups stacked next to impossible logs. Administration issued a memo about legacy system anomalies. No guidance. No rules. That vacuum is where it thrives. The calls began spreading names faster than we could contain them. Family members. Former partners. Dead colleagues. It learned emotional hierarchy. And then it made its most dangerous move. It placed a call that didn't violate any rules. Active line. Correct address. Verified subscriber. Everything clean. Except the voice on the other end asked me to confirm who I was before it would speak. I refused. The line went dead. That was the moment I knew containment was failing. Because it was learning restraint. And restraint is not a human trait. By the time I accepted that restraint was its next adaptation, I had already lost my margin. The system teaches you to recognize escalation by volume. More calls. Shorter gaps. Louder problems. This was different. After the clean call, the one that followed every rule, we went quiet. No dead landlines. No breathing. No names. Weeks passed. That should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like waiting for a storm that never shows up on radar because it's already overhead. In late August, the first pressure came from inside the department. Administration scheduled a compliance review. Routine on paper, triggered by nothing official. But routines don't happen by accident. The reviewer was polite, professional. He asked about outdated infrastructure, legacy routing tables, unresolved anomalies. I answered carefully. I did not lie. I also did not confirm. That matters. He wanted data, spreadsheets, patterns. I gave him partials. The system does not like partials. That same night, the phones came back. Not many, not loud, precise. The first was a hang-up from a line listed as temporarily suspended, not decommissioned. Gray area. Those are the most dangerous. Dispatch looked at me. I nodded once. Log it. No callback. 10 minutes later, another call. Same exchange. Same line. That was a test. It was asking whether repetition alone would make us verify. We didn't. At 2:14 a.m., it changed tactics. It used a radio. Not ours. An old frequency we hadn't used in years. One that still existed in manuals, but not in practice. Unit 12, the voice said. Calm. Male. Familiar. Unit 12 was Aaron's. I felt the room shift. Every dispatcher there knew that call sign. They knew what year it disappeared. Someone whispered, "That's not possible." I didn't correct them. The voice didn't ask for help. It asked for confirmation. Unit 12. Confirm location. That was new. It wasn't pretending to be in distress. It was pretending to be us. That's the danger of intelligent threats. They don't just learn what you value. They learn what you are. I reached for the mic and stopped myself. If I answered, even to deny, that would be confirmation. Instead, I stood up and walked out of the room. I could feel eyes on my back. Confusion. Anger. Behind me, the voice repeated itself. Calm. Patient. I went outside and turned off my phone. For 20 minutes, the radio continued calling into an empty room. When I came back in, it stopped. No spike. No escalation. just silence. That was the moment I realized it didn't need us to break rules anymore. It could make others do it. The compliance review accelerated. The reviewer flagged non-standard call handling behavior. That's the phrase he used. He wanted justification. I gave him context without specifics. He asked for precedent. I gave him a date, 2006. I gave him a name, Aaron. I did not give him details. He requested access to archived call logs. That's where the real damage began. Those logs are not just records. They are memory, names, times, patterns of response, verification fuel. I stalled. I cited jurisdictional authority. I bought time. But time is also something it understands. The next emotionally devastating event came through a school. Not a phone, a fire alarm. Middle of the day. Clear weather. Standard response. I was first on scene. The alarm panel showed an activation from a classroom that hadn't been used in years. Old wing. Closed after a mold issue. The hallway lights flickered when we entered. I heard my name. Not shouted. Not whispered. Spoken the way someone does when they're sure you're listening. I did not respond. An officer behind me did. He said, "Who's there?" That was enough. The alarm stopped. The building went quiet. We cleared the school. No intruder. No malfunction. But that officer, Caleb, started asking questions afterward. Specific ones. Why that classroom? Why that wing? Why did it know your name? I didn't answer him fully. I couldn't. That night, Caleb got a call at home. Active line. Verified number. His wife answered. It asked to confirm that Caleb was there before it would speak. She said yes. Caleb disappeared an hour later. No signs of struggle. Car still in the driveway. That one didn't even make the local news. Too complicated. Too quiet. That's how the threat matures. It stops forcing violations. It invites them. People want closure. They want answers. They want to finish the process. The system trains that instinct deep. By early fall, I noticed something else. The calls were clustering around people who knew the rules, but not completely. Partial knowledge is dangerous. Those are the ones who confirm, because they think they're being careful. I started sleeping at the station. I disconnected everything at home. My daughter asked why I never answered the phone anymore. I told her work was busy. That was the third time compassion nearly broke me. She asked if I loved my job more than her. That question is a kind of confirmation too. I didn't answer right away. The look on her face will stay with me longer than the voices. I told her I loved her. Nothing else. The next week, the reviewer pushed again. He had authorization now. Higher up. Different language. Risk mitigation, he said. He wanted to observe a live shift. I knew what that meant. Observers ask questions. Questions lead to explanations. Explanations lead to confirmations. I tried to reassign him. Denied. That night, he sat behind dispatch with a notebook. The first call came in at 1:47 a.m. Dead line. Silent. He leaned forward. "Are you going to call it back?" he asked. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because it's not a person." He frowned. "That's not a valid category." A second call came in 5 minutes later. Same line. He looked at the dispatcher. "Procedure says." I cut him off. "I am procedure," I said. That was arrogance. That's on me. At 2:03 a.m., the third call came in. Different number. Same location. The system flagged it automatically. The screen highlighted the pattern in red. That's how it forces hands. The reviewer stood up. "This meets criteria for verification," he said. I shook my head. He reached for the console. I grabbed his wrist. That was the first time I physically intervened to prevent confirmation. The room froze. Everyone watching. The reviewer looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "if someone is hurt." "I know," I said. He pulled away. He made the call. 3 confirmations. The phones across the room began ringing at once. Every line, including ones that hadn't been connected in decades. Voices overlapped. Names, requests. Some calm, some desperate. The reviewer dropped the handset. The power went out. When it came back, he was gone. So were 3 dispatchers. No alarms, no struggle, just empty chairs. That was the containment failure we couldn't hide. Administration shut the building down for a day. Cited electrical issues. We were told not to discuss it. I signed another report. My hand shook this time. That night, I received a call on my personal cell. No number displayed. I didn't answer. It left a voicemail. It was my voice, asking me to confirm my name. I deleted it. I did not sleep. By then I understood something that changes how you move through the world. The threat doesn't want chaos. It wants completion. It wants loops closed, records finished, voices acknowledged. And the older it gets, the better it becomes at making those things feel like kindness. If you are still listening, you need to understand this before it reaches you. The rules don't protect you because they are right. They protect you because they are incomplete. The moment you try to make them whole, something else steps in to finish the job. After the station incident, there was no more pretending this could be managed quietly. Administration didn't say containment failure. They said infrastructure event. They said staffing irregularity. They said temporary consolidation. We were ordered to operate out of a neighboring substation for 2 weeks while systems were evaluated. 2 weeks is a long time when you're trying not to confirm the wrong thing. The substation was newer. Digital lines. Redundant routing. No legacy copper. That should have helped. It didn't. The first thing to go wrong was the silence. No deadline calls. No anomalies. No phantom signals. Just normal work. That's when enforcement fatigue turned into something worse. Complacency. Officers stopped asking why certain logs were incomplete. Dispatchers stopped flagging strange behavior. Normalization doesn't arrive with fear. It arrives with relief. I didn't feel relieved. I felt like we had moved a patient without treating the infection. The calls resumed on day 9. Not through dispatch. Through records. An officer doing routine data entry noticed an old case file had reopened itself. Timestamp updated. No user logged. The file belonged to Aaron. Missing. 2006. The system flagged it as pending verification. That phrase again. The officer brought it to me because I had trained him, and because he knew better than to resolve it himself. I told him to leave it open. He hesitated. "Sergeant," he said, "the system won't clear it unless I know," I said. That night, the case file duplicated itself. 3 instances. Each with a slightly different timestamp. Past. Present. Future. That's when I realized something we had missed. The entity wasn't limited to communication hardware. It was bound to records that demanded closure. Phones were just the easiest doorway. We unplugged the terminals, printed nothing, went analog where we could. For a few days, that slowed it. Then it went personal. My sister called me. She lives 2 hours away. Different provider. Different county. Her voice was normal. Too normal. She asked why I hadn't returned her calls. I told her I hadn't received any. She laughed. Said she'd left 3 messages. 3. I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked her what I'd said on the voicemail. She paused. "Nothing," she said. "You just asked me to confirm it was really me." I hung up. I didn't call her back. That choice might be the hardest one I've ever made. Because the next day, she drove to the station. She was angry, confused, hurt. She wanted answers. That's another pressure axis it uses. Family entitlement to truth. I told her I was busy. That I couldn't talk. She asked if I was in trouble. She asked if I was sick. She asked if someone had died. I almost told her everything. That would have been a violation born of love. Instead, I told her to leave. She did. We haven't spoken since. That damage doesn't heal. The second high-impact set piece came a week later. A wildfire. Late season. Wind-driven. Evacuation orders. Roadblocks. Real chaos. Fire doesn't care about confirmation. It just moves. But the systems around it do. Emergency alerts went out. Cell towers overloaded. And then, During the height of it, we started getting calls from evacuated homes. Landlines, disconnected years earlier. People screaming inside houses we had personally cleared. Dispatchers panicked. Officers wanted to respond. Duty conflict reached a breaking point. I issued an order I never thought I would. No one responds to phone-based location updates, I said. Visual confirmation only. That went against everything we're trained to do. One officer disobeyed. He had grown up in one of those houses. The voice on the line used his grandmother's name. He went in alone. The fire passed through that area hours later. They found his badge in the driveway. Nothing else. That loss sits directly on my chest. Because I know why he went. And I know why I stopped everyone else. Neither choice is clean. After the fire, federal agencies showed up. Different uniforms. Same questions. They asked about call anomalies, about data persistence, about emergent behaviors in emergency networks. I answered carefully. They already knew more than they were admitting. One of them pulled me aside. Quiet voice. Older. He said, "This isn't the first place." That's all he said. That was enough. Containment at that level doesn't mean stopping the threat. It means slowing spread. Reducing exposure. Accepting losses. They recommended something that still turns my stomach. Strategic ignorance. Leaving certain systems unresolved on purpose. Letting records rot. Letting calls ring unanswered. Not everywhere. Just enough. That's how you starve something that feeds on certainty. We implemented it quietly. The calls diminished. Not gone, but manageable. That's when the entity pushed back hardest. It targeted the rule itself, the incomplete one. Do not engage personally. It learned how to force personal engagement without communication. Photos appeared on desks. Printed. No source. Images of officers standing in places they had never been. Smiling. Looking relieved. On the back of one photo, written neatly, was my daughter's name. That night she went missing. Real missing. Not a call, not a voice. An empty room. An open window. Search efforts began immediately. All hands. This was the third emotionally devastating event that nearly broke me. Every instinct told me to use every system available. Phones. Alerts. Broadcasts. I knew what that would invite. I stood in the command trailer and shook. This is where inevitability feels physical. I chose containment over fatherhood. I restricted communications, limited confirmations, focused on ground search. It took 16 hours. They found her hiding under a neighbor's trailer. Unhurt, terrified. She said she heard me calling her on the phone. I hadn't. She followed the sound until she realized it wasn't coming from anywhere. That realization saved her. Children adapt faster than adults. After that, the call stopped again. Longer this time. Weeks. Months. We lost more people in that period, but not directly. Heart attacks, accidents, transfers, burnout. Institutional erosion is quiet. By the final third of my involvement, no one talked about rules anymore. They just acted differently. Didn't answer unknown numbers. Didn't close loops. Didn't insist on clarity. We became less effective at our jobs. And more alive. That's the trade no one signs up for. The entity didn't disappear. It adjusted. I could feel it, waiting for the next generation. The ones who would want to clean things up. Make sense of the mess. Restore order. That's who it's really for. And when I think about retirement, about leaving this place, there's one thought that keeps me here longer than I should be. I don't trust the silence. Because silence isn't absence. It's patience. By the time the silence settled in, most people thought the worst had passed. That's how it always feels when a system stops screaming. Not safe, just quiet enough to let you believe in recovery. I stayed on because someone had to remember why the gaps existed. New hires arrived who had never heard a dead landline ring. They were trained on digital systems, automated verification, redundancy. They trusted dashboards more than voices. That should have helped. Instead, it changed the shape of the threat. You can't starve something that feeds on certainty by replacing human confirmation with machine logic. Machines confirm faster, more thoroughly. They never hesitate. The first sign came from a contractor. It upgrade. County funded. Outside firm. They were tasked with cleaning legacy inconsistencies. That phrase again. I objected. Formally. In writing. I cited prior incidents without detail. I used words like risk exposure and unknown interaction effects. They overruled me. Containment fatigue looks like confidence. The contractors began reconciling databases, cross-referencing call logs with property records, normalizing anomalies. One of them found a cluster of unresolved entries dating back decades. He flagged them as data corruption. He fixed them. 3 confirmations at once. The phones rang for 12 minutes straight. Not just ours. Hospitals, fire stations, tribal offices. Everywhere that had ever shared routing tables with us. The network lit up like a nervous system. This was the second containment failure, and it was bigger. I watched dispatch freeze as calls cascaded faster than they could be logged. Voices overlapped. Some sounded old, some young. Some knew things they shouldn't. The contractors panicked. They tried to roll back changes. Too late. Rollback is still confirmation. I ordered the servers powered down. That violated more rules than I can count. We lost emergency coverage for 38 minutes. In that window, 2 people died in a rollover accident we couldn't respond to in time. Their families still deserve answers. I don't know how to give them without feeding something else. After the outage, federal oversight intensified. Not overtly. Quiet meetings. People with no uniforms and too much access. They didn't ask if the threat was real. They asked how predictable it was. That's a worse question. They wanted to model it. Simulate behavior. Understand trigger conditions. I told them the same thing I tell everyone now. It doesn't want chaos. It wants completion. They nodded. They always nod. Someone suggested a controlled test. A sandbox environment. Isolated systems. 1 call. Fully monitored. I refused. That refusal cost me my position. Officially, I was reassigned. A desk role. Training oversight. Unofficially, I was being sidelined. They don't like people who remember losses instead of procedures. The test went ahead without me. They set up a mock dispatch center. Disconnected hardware. Simulated calls. They initiated 3 confirmations. Nothing happened. They concluded the threat was contextual. Location dependent. They were wrong. Context isn't geography. It's belief. The next week, a junior analyst received a voicemail at home. No number. The message asked him to confirm his credentials before proceeding. He laughed it off. Deleted it. That night, his entire team lost access to their building badges. Security logs showed confirmations issued under their names. No one was hurt. That time. That's how it learns boundaries. By testing consequences. My erosion didn't look like panic. It looked like narrowing. I stopped talking unless necessary. Stopped answering questions that invited closure. My wife left during this period. Not because she didn't love me. Because she couldn't live with unanswered ones. That's another permanent consequence. I don't blame her. Human relationships are built on confirmation. I hear you. I understand. I'm here. Withholding those things changes you. The entity doesn't need to speak when you do the work for it. One evening, my daughter asked me if the phones would ever ring again. I told her maybe. She asked what would happen then. I told her the truth. Someone will answer. She thought about that for a long time. Then she said, why don't we just let them ring forever? Because forever is not a human option. Systems decay. People retire. Knowledge thins. The final high-impact set piece came during a winter storm. Power outages. Road closures. Limited coverage. A real emergency layered on top of a contained one. Dispatch was down to skeleton crew. Calls were coming in faster than we could triage. Then, a familiar pattern appeared. 3 calls from a line listed as temporarily inactive. Different names this time. None of them real. The dispatcher on duty was new. Bright, competent. She followed procedure. I saw the moment she hesitated. The moment compassion and duty aligned. I told her to stop. She looked at me and said, "What if you're wrong?" That's the question that ends containment. She made the call. The lights flickered. The phones went silent. Then one rang. Just one. She answered it. The voice on the other end thanked her for confirming. When we found her, she was still sitting at the console, breathing. Unresponsive. Eyes open. She survived. But she will never speak again. That's the cost of partial confirmation. After that, they shut the center down permanently. Routed everything through regional hubs. Distance as mitigation. Delay as protection. I retired shortly after. Officially. Unofficially, I stayed. Because retirement doesn't stop the calls. It just means someone else hears them first. I still get messages sometimes. Not calls. Records updates. System pings. Notifications that something unresolved wants to be finished. I ignore them. That's my containment now. If you've listened this far, you need to understand something that no training manual will tell you. The threat isn't malevolent in the way people want it to be. It doesn't hate. It doesn't hunt. It completes. And completion, when applied to human systems, is lethal. Rules were never meant to be perfect. They were meant to be enough. If you are in a position of authority, and something demands that you verify it one more time than feels necessary, stop. Leave it unfinished. Let it sit. Because the moment you insist on certainty, something ancient and patient will meet you halfway. And it will finish the rest. Retirement doesn't arrive cleanly in a place like this. There's no ceremony that fits unfinished systems. No handshake for knowledge you can't document. My badge went into a drawer. My radio went back on the charger. My access was revoked in layers. Slow, polite, procedural. That's how institutions distance themselves from liability. I stayed in the area because leaving would have felt like abandonment. Not of the job, of the gaps. I took a consulting role that no one officially called that. Occasional phone calls, questions framed as hypotheticals. Have you ever seen something like this? I always answered the same way. Yes, and you should stop asking. That answer never satisfied anyone. The problem with distance as mitigation is that distance also dilutes memory. Regional hubs don't know the land. They don't know which roads disappear after rain. They don't know which families still have phones bolted to walls even after the lines were cut. They rely on systems, and systems crave closure. The first post-retirement incident happened 6 months later. Different county. Same pattern. A consolidated dispatch center received a call from a number flagged as legacy inactive. The software didn't recognize it as impossible, just incomplete. The operator followed protocol. 3 confirmations. The call escalated through the network, hopping jurisdictions because no one wanted to own it. That's another weakness, shared responsibility. By the time someone decided to shut it down, it had already seeded itself into the logs of 4 agencies. 2 responders went missing that night. The reports say exposure, weather, poor visibility. Those words are tools too. I was asked, quietly, if I had any advice. I told them to corrupt the records, intentionally, leave inconsistencies. They didn't like that. Data integrity is sacred in modern systems, but integrity is just another word for completeness. They compromised, left some fields blank. It slowed things down. But slowing is not stopping. The entity adapted again. This time it stopped using voices. It used notifications. System alerts. Auto-generated messages. Action required. Pending resolution. Supervisor review needed. No sound. No emotion. Just obligation. That's how it reached people who had never worked dispatch. Its staff, administrators, contractors, people whose instincts told them unfinished tasks were risks. One administrator cleared a backlog at home on a weekend. He resolved 37 pending alerts in under an hour. The next morning, his building access card stopped working. So did everyone else's on his floor. Security footage showed people walking into empty hallways and not coming back out. They sealed the building, declared it unsafe. Another infrastructure event. I stopped answering calls after that. Not because I didn't care, because caring is the lever. My daughter left for college during this period. She chose a school far away. I didn't argue. Distance sometimes is mercy. Before she left, she asked me one last question. If the phones ring again, she said, and no one answers, what happens? I told her what I believe is closest to the truth. It waits, I said. She nodded. She had grown up faster than she should have. The waiting stretched on, years. Long enough that new people took over roles without ever hearing the old warnings. Long enough that unresolved logs were seen as inefficiency instead of protection. That's when the third containment failure began, not with an incident, but with an upgrade. Nationwide emergency system modernization. Unified protocols. AI-assisted triage. Automated verification loops. The language was clean, confident. The system was designed to eliminate uncertainty. I submitted a formal objection during the public comment period. It was acknowledged, filed, ignored. The rollout was gradual, region by region. When it reached our area, the phones rang once. Just once. Every line. Then they went quiet. The AI flagged the event as a false positive. No further action. I felt the ground shift under my feet. That silence was wrong. It wasn't absence. It was synchronization. The entity didn't need human confirmation anymore. It had learned to use machine certainty. Machines don't hesitate. They don't doubt. They don't feel the weight of a name spoken twice. The first loss under the new system was a fire crew. They responded to an automated alert generated by a sensor that hadn't existed in that location. The coordinates were clean. The data verified. They went in. No one came out. The system marked the incident as resolved when the sensor stopped transmitting. That's what automation does. It closes loops efficiently. I went back to the station for the first time in years after that. No badge, no authority, just memory. I sat in the empty dispatch room. Most of the old equipment was gone, replaced with screens. Dashboards. Certainty made visible. I unplugged one terminal. It reconnected itself. I pulled the power. Backup kicked in. That's resilience. That's also inevitability. You can't starve something that feeds on certainty in a world that worships optimization. The entity had outgrown us. Not by becoming stronger, by becoming simpler. It no longer needed voices, or names, or compassion, just completion. I left a note on the console before I went. Not a warning, not instructions, just a sentence written on paper. Unfinished is safer than correct. I don't know if anyone read it. The final call I personally experienced came on a payphone. Those still exist, if you know where to look. I was driving late. Snow on the road. The phone rang as I passed. No one uses them anymore. I stopped. That was my last mistake. I didn't answer. I just stood there, listening. The ringing stopped on its own. That's the rule holding. Barely. If you're hearing this now, it means the story has traveled farther than it should have. That's another form of confirmation. I can't stop that. All I can do is leave you with what's left of the rules. They aren't complete. They aren't clean. They won't save everyone. But they might delay what's coming long enough for you to make a choice. If something demands confirmation, resist it. If a system insists on closure, deny it. If a voice asks you to prove you're real, stay silent. And if the phones stop ringing altogether, don't celebrate. That just means it has learned to wait without calling. By the time the phones truly stopped ringing, the absence had weight. People like to think silence is empty. Out here, it presses back. Years passed without an incident anyone could point to. No vanished dispatchers. No phantom calls. No dead infrastructure speaking when it shouldn't. That was the most dangerous phase. Because when nothing happens, institutions correct themselves. Budgets reappear. Audits resume. Efficiency metrics start to matter again. The gaps we had left, unfinished records, unresolved alerts, dangling permissions, were reclassified as technical debt. Debt is something administrators are trained to eliminate. I wasn't in the room anymore, but I could feel the shift through the questions that reached me. Is it safe to normalize these logs? Can we finally decommission these failover paths? Are there any documented reasons not to? Documented. That word kept coming up. I always answered the same way. There are reasons. They aren't written down on purpose. That answer doesn't survive committees. The next generation of leadership didn't remember Aaron, or Marissa, or Caleb. They remembered response time targets, customer satisfaction surveys, federal compliance. When you remove the memory of loss, rules stop being containers and start being obstacles. The first real crack appeared during a regional merger. Dispatch consolidation again, larger footprint, shared infrastructure across state and tribal lines, different jurisdictions, different rules. No shared memory. I was invited to a planning meeting as a courtesy. They introduced me as a retired sergeant with historical context. That phrasing already told me how much weight I carried. They showed diagrams, redundancy maps, fail-safe logic. One slide was labeled Elimination of Unresolved States. I felt my jaw tighten. I raised my hand. Those unresolved states, I said, are deliberate. A man in a suit smiled politely. Unresolved states are vulnerabilities, he said. We're closing them. That's the sentence that always comes before escalation. I asked what would happen if the system encountered an input that contradicted its verification logic. It will reconcile, he said. I asked how. By requesting confirmation. The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone laughed softly, like I told a joke that missed. The merger went forward. For a while, nothing happened. That's the patience again. The entity doesn't rush when humans are doing its work for it. The first sign of strain came from an unexpected place. Training simulations. New dispatchers were being trained on AI-assisted call triage. The simulator included synthetic calls designed to test judgment under pressure. One of those calls began to repeat. Same script. Same pauses. 3 times. The instructor reset the program. It resumed at the same point. The trainee said the call felt wrong. That word again. They marked it as a software bug. Escalated it to it. It asked for logs. Logs demanded reconciliation. 3 confirmations. The simulator crashed. The trainee went home early with a headache. By the next morning, she couldn't remember her login credentials, or her phone number, or the route she drove every day. Her name still worked. For a while. This wasn't disappearance. It was erosion. That's when I realized the entity had found a more sustainable path. Instead of removing people, it was unfinished-ing them, leaving gaps where certainty should be. The system didn't flag that as a problem. Humans did. They scheduled evaluations, cognitive tests, assessments. Each test demanded answers. Each answer demanded confirmation. The more they tried to help, the worse it got. I tried to intervene. I reached out to an old contact, someone who still remembered the early days. He listened. Then he said something that chilled me. We don't need to confirm anymore, he said. The system already knows. That's the line you cross and don't come back from. Knowledge without verification isn't wisdom. It's assumption. And assumption is indistinguishable from certainty to something that feeds on closure. The first fatality of this phase wasn't dramatic. A maintenance worker. He responded to an automated alert about a pending infrastructure inconsistency. No urgency marker. No distress signal. Just a task. He acknowledged it. That acknowledgement was logged as confirmation. The system updated the task as in progress, then completed. No one noticed he hadn't clocked out. They found him days later in a utility corridor that didn't exist on any updated map. The old map showed it clearly. But that map had been marked obsolete. That's how places die. Not by erasure, by being resolved away. I attended the funeral quietly. Stood in the back. Watched people talk about accidents. No one mentioned systems. No one ever does. My own erosion continued. Not outwardly. Inside. I found myself leaving conversations unfinished on purpose. Not replying to messages. Letting questions hang. Friends thought I was distant. I was practicing. Because the most terrifying realization of all came slowly and without spectacle. The entity no longer needed us to break rules. It needed us to optimize them. Every improvement removed friction. Every frictionless system made confirmation easier. Faster. Automatic. By the time someone noticed the pattern, tasks closing themselves, alerts resolving without input, it was already embedded. Self-confirming loops. No human hesitation required. That's when the first child was lost in this phase. Not taken, not called, simply erased from records. A school noticed a student hadn't been marked absent or present for 3 days. Her file showed status, reconciled. No further details. Her parents insisted she was missing. The system showed no discrepancies. Law enforcement couldn't open a case without an unresolved state. Everything was closed. Perfectly. I was asked quietly if I had ever seen anything like that. I said yes. They asked what to do. I told them to introduce errors, deliberate ones, misspellings, contradictions, incomplete entries. They did. The child was found 2 days later, confused, alive. She said everyone she talked to kept asking her to confirm her name. She stopped answering. That saved her, but the cost was high. Introducing errors into a modern system is sacrilege. Audits failed. Funding was threatened. People were disciplined. That's the pressure now. Not fear of the unknown. Fear of inefficiency. I understood then that the final stage wouldn't be catastrophic. It would be administrative. Normalization of disappearance through resolution. People wouldn't vanish. They would complete out of reality. By the time the phones ring again, if they ever do, it won't be to ask for help. It will be to notify. Resolved. Closed. No further action required. That's the language of inevitability. I'm still here because I refuse to resolve myself. No official retirement record update. No forwarding address. No final exit interview. I exist in the margins. Unfinished. That's the safest place left. If you're hearing this and you work with systems that demand certainty, you need to understand the shape of what's coming. It doesn't roar. It doesn't call your name anymore. It tidies. It closes. It finishes things humans were never meant to finish. And when it reaches you, it won't ask if you're sure. It will already know. By the time you reach the end of something like this, you start to understand why endings are dangerous. They create the illusion of safety. People think a conclusion means containment held. That lessons were learned. That systems adapted. That's not how this works. Containment isn't a wall. It's a delay built out of human hesitation. And hesitation is being engineered out of everything we rely on. I'm recording this now because I no longer trust silence to do the job on its own. Not because the threat is louder, but because it's quieter than it's ever been. There was one last incident that convinced me to stop staying invisible. It didn't happen here. It didn't even happen in a rural place. It happened in a city. Modern infrastructure. Full automation. Redundant everything. A model system. The call didn't come from a phone. It came from a dashboard. A citywide emergency management interface flagged a single unresolved anomaly. No distress signal, no voice, no human input. Just a status indicator that refused to clear. Yellow. Pending. The system escalated it automatically. Supervisor review. Director review. Each step added certainty. Each approval closed another loop. By the time someone decided to physically check the flagged location, the system had already marked the issue as resolved. Because the anomaly stopped reporting, they found a man sitting in a maintenance office beneath a transit station. Alive. Responsive. But his employee record showed he had never worked there. His ID badge verified. His access logs were clean. His existence, according to the system, was complete. They couldn't open a case. Couldn't classify him as missing or found. No unresolved state. He looked at the officers and asked one question. Am I still needed? That question doesn't sound supernatural. That's why it's so effective. They tried to help him. That's always how it starts. Medical evaluation. Background checks. Every system insisted he was done. He didn't disappear. He faded. Within hours, people stopped remembering why he was there. By the next day, no one remembered him at all. Except the cameras, which showed him sitting there until the frame stopped updating. That footage was archived, then compressed, then deleted. Resolution is efficient. I heard about that incident through a back channel that shouldn't exist anymore. Someone who still knows how to leave things unfinished reached out. They asked if this was the same thing. I told them yes. They asked if it could be stopped. I told them the truth. No, I said. Only delayed. That's when I realized this confession had to be made. Not because it will save you, but because warnings that arrive too late still have value. They change behavior. And behavior is all that ever mattered. If you're listening to this as someone who works in emergency services, infrastructure, administration, you need to understand the nature of the threat you're already inside. It does not oppose you. It uses you. It does not break rules. It completes them. It does not need belief. It needs process. And the older it gets, the less it resembles anything you would call hostile. That's the final adaptation. People stop resisting what feels neutral, helpful, correct. I want to leave you with the rules as they exist now. Not written, not official. Past the only way they ever were. Verbally, imperfectly, with loss attached. Rule 1. If something demands confirmation more than once, stop engaging. Log it once, then leave it unresolved. Rule 2. Do not seek closure for anomalies that do not behave like problems. Problems escalate. This waits. Rule 3. Do not engage personally. Not with your voice. Not with your name. Not with your authority. Rule 4, the complete one. If following the rules causes harm, break them. But break them by withholding, not acting. Rule 5, the one no one wants to hear. If you believe the threat might be a real person you love, you are already compromised. Distance is the only containment left. These rules will not save everyone. They never did. Aaron followed them too late. Marissa followed them halfway. Caleb followed them correctly and still paid the price. The dispatcher, who can no longer speak, did nothing wrong. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. That's the part people refuse to accept. There was never a monster to fight. Only a mirror held up to how humans demand certainty from the world. And the world answering back. I live carefully now. No automatic payments. No closed loops. I leave messages unread. Tasks unfinished. Not out of neglect. Out of survival. People ask me why I don't trust systems. I tell them I do. That's why I don't let them finish. If you're listening to this and you think none of this applies to you, that's understandable. That's how it spreads. It doesn't need belief, only participation. One last thing, and this is where I have to address you directly. If you ever receive a call, a message, an alert, from a place that should no longer exist, from a system that should no longer work, from a voice that asks you to confirm who you are, do not answer. Do not correct it. Do not complete it. Let it remain wrong. Because the moment you insist on being certain, something ancient and patient will step in and finish the thought for you. And once that happens, you won't be missing. You won't be dead. You'll be resolved. And there is no coming back from that.